So today we're talking about Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. This is a novel I think that has a reputation that very much precedes it, and I don't know if that's entirely a good thing. Hopefully YouTube doesn't demonetize this video immediately. Hopefully it'll let me talk about this novel since it is literature. But really there's no getting around it. There's no getting around what the novel is about because it's about pedophilia. Or if you want to be completely accurate, it's about hebephilia. But to be honest, if you ever meet anyone who tries to make a distinction between those two things, you should probably call the cops because neither one is good. They're both bad. And so just as a result of its subject matter alone, this is a book that a lot of people won't touch or won't read at all, which is a shame because it's great literature, honestly. Nabokov, I think, was a genius. I think that he was one of the greatest writers of the 20th century. In this book, Lolita is a large part of the reason why. It takes a lot of skill and tact to approach a subject matter like this and to make an entire novel out of it. And more than that, I think this novel is skillfully put together. It's masterfully written. It's an incredible exercise in the act of having an unreliable narrator. And all in all, it's just a great novel, but at the same time, it's very difficult to recommend this. I would be hard pressed to think of anyone in my circle who I would recommend this to. And again, the reason why it's hard to recommend to people is because of its subject matter, because ultimately it's about a pedophile or a hebephile, who cares? It's about a middle-aged man who falls in love with a 12-year-old girl. And more than that, it is written from his perspective. And so as a result, I think that a lot of people have the wrong idea about this book. This is one thing that I've seen a lot actually, people calling this book a love story, people calling it romantic. My buddy went out with a girl while I was in the middle of reading this, and they were talking about books, and she told them that Lolita is her favorite book because she finds it romantic, and I told him, that's a red flag, bud. I'm like, that's not good, dude. And the book came out in the 50s, and so as a result, there have been decades worth of criticism on it, and I still think that a lot of people have the wrong idea about this book. Because I do think that there are a shocking number of people, a disgusting number of people, quite frankly, who interpret this book as some kind of tragic love story, but it's not. Because really, this is a book about a crazed, deranged, evil person. So with this video, I would like to take a look at the novel itself, analyze it for a little bit, and then I would like to talk about why I think it's important in the year 2025. Basically, for those of you who aren't familiar with this novel and don't know the major story beats, this book is about a man named Humbert. This is an alias, obviously. This is not his real birth name, but rather this is a name that he gave to himself. And it makes him sound silly, honestly. It makes him sound fun, right? Humbert. It sounds fun in the same way that Grand Wizard sounds fun. It's a name that sounds silly, but really it's kind of distracting from how evil this person is. This book opens actually with a prologue that's written by someone other than Humbert. This foreword tells you that you are reading the story of a man who was imprisoned for his crimes and died after having written his story. And there are a couple ideas from this foreword that kind of tell you how to view the text that you're about to read that I think are really important. Viewed simply as a novel, Lolita deals with situations and emotions that would remain exasperatingly vague to the reader had their expression been exfoliated by means of platitudinous evasions. Really, this is a tale about abuse, about manipulation, about kidnapping. It's about lying and unresolved trauma and making new trauma for someone. And so I find it very difficult to take it seriously if someone says that this is a love story, because it is not. There's an idea here in the foreword that I really love. Not a single obscene term is to be found in the whole work. And I think that's something that's really special about this novel, because even though it is about pedophilia, even though it's about a subject matter that is gross and disgusting, half the reason why this story is viewed as literature and not pornography or erotica is because of that fact, because of the fact that the story actually doesn't contain too many curse words. In fact, there were not one, but 2 curse words that I counted throughout the entire work. And there are a lot of things that are not explicitly stated. So for instance, there aren't any smutty sex scenes in this book. You don't get any explicit details like that, but what you do get is actually kind of disturbing, because instead of choosing to go into great detail about his and Lolita's intimate moments, what he does instead is he writes out the moments as if they're poetry almost. And so you get a lot of seemingly unrelated imagery, which honestly, again, like I said, is more disturbing, I think. Basically, for a very quick plot rundown, there's a man, Humbert. He has this idea about what he calls nymphets being very special. The way he writes about it is really creepy. And keep in mind, whenever I'm saying this, this is not me. This is me recounting Humbert's views. And Humbert is an unreliable narrator, and so his words aren't to be trusted. But he claims that nymphets are basically these 12-year-old girls who act as seductresses. According to him, not every young girl is a nymphette, and it's not always clear which girls are nymphets and which aren't. But some of these these girls just have a certain X factor. And so he just has this wild attraction to these young girls that he sees essentially as seductresses. I think that Nabokov gives you a multitude of reasons for why this may be. It's hinted that a lot of this obsession is due to the fact that whenever he was about that age, he lost a lover who was of the same age. Basically, that girl died and he never got to say goodbye. But also both before he meets Lolita and afterwards, he ends up in a mental institution. So obviously he has mental issues. As I've said before, he's unreliable as a narrator. He's a bit crazy. He's very paranoid. And really, he is a narcissist. So Humbert's story is that he went to school. He became a professor. He got married to a woman that was an adult. She ran off with someone and he didn't really care, and then they both died in an accident. And all this time he was trying to restrain his urges, basically. He was trying to not go after nymphets. And then he begins traveling. He needs a place to live, and so he ends up renting a room from Mrs. Hayes. And it turns out that Mrs. Hayes has a 12-year-old daughter, Lolita, who he immediately falls in love with. According to Humbert, Lolita is a nymphette, and he falls so in love with her and basically wants to seduce her. You learn that Mrs. Hayes' husband died whenever Lolita was young. Her name is actually Dolores, by the way. It's only Humbert who calls her Lolita. According to Humbert, he is extremely good looking and he is extremely attractive, and Mrs. Hayes falls in love with him. She tells him that she wants to have a relationship with him, or he needs to move out because she cannot stand having him in the house if she cannot be with him. And so from there, he marries Mrs. Hayes, so that way he can be close to Lolita, who is his new stepdaughter, because again, he wants to seduce her. He doesn't give a crap about Mrs. Hayes, her mom, but rather he just wants a chance to assault Lolita. Mrs. Hayes sends Dolores away to camp for the summer. Humbert keeps a journal, which he keeps locked away, wherein he writes down that he hates Mrs. Hayes, his wife, and he just wants to seduce her daughter, Lolita, and she ends up stumbling upon Humbert's journal, wherein she reads all this junk that was written about her. He tries to play it off as he was writing a novel, but of course she doesn't buy it and knows that he's a creep. So she storms out of the house, carrying letters and tears. Basically, these letters are to different people explaining the situation. She's leaving Humbert behind. He can keep the house. She doesn't care. She just wants to protect her daughter. And throughout all this, by the way, it's noted that he has all these plans and he's like, oh, should I kill my wife so that way I can be closer to Lolita? And it does not come to pass because as she is about to mail these letters, she gets hit by a car. So she dies instantly, the letters do not get mailed, and Humbert makes up this story and tells all the neighbors that he is actually Lolita's true father. And so what this means is that you have a guy who's a pedophile who's in love with this 12-year-old girl who is the only next of kin who she could possibly claim, because I forget if the rest of the family is dead or if the Hayeses are estranged from them, but either way, basically Humbert is the only person who could potentially care for Lolita. And so what he does is he goes and he picks her up from camp. Humbert initially tells Lolita that her mom is in the hospital, and of course she's dead. And he takes her on all these trips and they stay at different hotels and they go to different places and go to amusement parks and bookstores and whatever else. He buys her everything and anything. All the while, of course, he wants to sleep with her. He does end up drugging her and attempting to assault her while she's asleep, but these sleeping pills that he got from the doctor were actually weaker than the doctor stated, and so as a result he's not able to. But nevertheless, they end up sleeping together. There are plenty of things, even way before her mother died, that seemed to imply that Lolita was attracted to Humbert, her stepfather. According to Humbert, there was a poster of a man that looked remarkably similar to him on Lolita's bedroom wall. There were things that she said and looks that she made, and the way he writes it, it makes it sound almost like she seduced him. But again, this is a book that is written by a crazy person and a narcissist, and ultimately is unreliable. It's one of those things where that's a lot of what makes this book interesting, is the fact that you don't know how much of it to actually believe. It's a lot like American Psycho in that sense. But long story short, basically they're together for the next couple of years. They have a road trip that lasts for like a year before she goes to school, and then they start another road trip by the time she's 14. Eventually Humbert does tell Lolita that her mother died, and all the while throughout this 2-year period, they are engaging in sexual acts and having that sort of relationship, but it's not built around love, contrary to what people like J.K. Rowling would say. It absolutely is not. It's built around bribery. Humbert will oftentimes buy stuff for Lolita in an attempt to be like, all right, you know, we have to sleep with each other later. At the start of the trip, he gives her an allowance, but by the end of the trip, his need for her is so great and she's played it so well that basically her allowance has like tripled or something like that. And Humbert very much abuses her. He lies to her. He hits her. As I said, he tried drugging her. He gaslights her. He lies to her. He manipulates her in every single way he can. At one point, he even steals the money that he had given her, and she believes that it's the cleaning lady who did. And so all in all, this is a very nasty book about a middle-aged man taking advantage of a child, essentially. And so I feel the need to say all that just because of the fact that this book has such a weird reputation. People hear that this book is about a pedophile and then they immediately think, oh, this book must be in favor of pedophilia, and it's like, absolutely not. Nabokov says in an afterword to the book that there is no moral to it, there's no moral to the story, and honestly I think that's the only way to do something like this, because if you were trying to tell a moralizing story, if you were trying to tell a story with the moral pedophilia is bad, then it would come across as preachy, and quite frankly it would not be that interesting to read, because we know that everyone knows that pedophilia is bad. Hopefully, you know, I mean, I guess I'll wait to make the joke. There's a joke about the government in the year 2025, but we'll talk about that later. And so this book is able to be a great work of literature just because of the way it's written. It's a great book, not because it's a love story, because it's not, but rather just Nabokov is able to weave this really gripping and shocking and disgusting tale. And there are so many great lines in this book, and really it's just a very shameful tale of abuse. Apparently there are certain critics that deny that Humbert raped Lolita, but really I don't think there's a way around it. He 100% did, because what he does is he takes this child who has no family, and whenever he is the only person she can trust, he takes advantage of her. He has power over her, and there really isn't anything that she can do except run away. And she tries that at least once, but he comes back and gets her, though ultimately that is how she gets away from him. And so half the reason why I feel the need to make this video is to sort of put that out there. This book is awesome, but it's not because it supports pedophilia, because I don't think it does. If I felt like this book was supporting pedophilia, number one, I would not read it. Number two, I would not recommend it. And number three, this video would be very different. I would have a very different tone. But I do think that people are deeply uncomfortable with the concept of having a story wherein the protagonist is not a good guy. I think that's kind of what most people have grown up with. You have Star Wars and Marvel movies and Tales about Knights, and you have Batman. In all of the big franchises, the people that we spend the most time with are the good guys, but not with this. And so I think that's half the reason why this book gets misinterpreted so often. And then I think the other half of it, I think part of the reason why people will refer to this as a love story, I think part of that is because of the fact that this is written by an unreliable narrator. And so as a result, he is obviously capable of skewing things and making himself look better than he should. He's able to give all the reasons for why he did what he did, and by the end of it he even seems repentant almost, and he acknowledges that what he did was evil and that he is the lowest of the low. But really, don't be fooled by the man with the silver tongue, right? The narrator does everything he can to make himself seem likable, and he does everything he can to try to justify his actions, but ultimately there is no justification for the kidnapping and the gaslighting and the assault and anything else that he did. So now we get to the second half of the video, which is less an analysis of the text and more so a question of how it relates to the real world. One thing that's noteworthy about this story is the fact that we only hear from Humbert's perspective. We never hear anything from Mrs. Hayes or from Lolita. This is a first-person narrative written by someone who is ultimately unreliable. And so we never hear from the object of desire. We never hear from the light of my fire, fire of my loins, my sin, my soul, Lolita, the tip of my tongue, Lolita, Lolita, the tip of the tongue, taking a trip of 3 steps down the palate to tap at 3 on the teeth. Lolita. Humbert spends the entire book praising Lolita and talking about how she's so beautiful and gorgeous, and more than that, he talks about how she is an nymphette. But really, this all kind of exists only in his mind. Reading between the lines a little bit, I think that she's probably just a 12-year-old girl. Is that fair to say? And so one thing that is worth considering when thinking about this book basically is the question, how much of what Humbert writes is completely divorced from reality? And I mean that more so within the context of their relationship than I do anything else. Don't get me wrong, there are a lot of weird things, especially in the second half of the book. Humbert becomes increasingly paranoid. He thinks that people are following him. He thinks that people are saying weird things to him or staring at Lolita weird. He interprets all these different innocuous situations as basically being some kind of weird attempt from other people to get Lolita or Lolita to run away from him. There are all these different things and you don't really know what to believe. And so there is that aspect to it. But whenever I ask the question how much of it is reality and how much of it is just made up in his head, I'm talking more so about his view of Lolita. Because fundamentally, he does not view her as a person, he views her as this mythical creature. Again, he views her as a nymphette. Not a nymph, but a nymphette. And so how this relates to the real world, I think, is very interesting because of the fact that I think you actually see this sort of thinking a lot more than you might expect. I think you see this sort of thinking with regards to relationships all the time. Particularly with guys, I think that you see a lot of this online. You see a lot of guys basically view women as some kind of fundamentally different creature from them. Or you'll have all these guys online who complain about like not being able to get a girlfriend. And I think a lot of the reason why is because, again, they view it as some kind of weird, unachievable thing, or they meet a girl and then they view her as some higher being. And so this book is very much an extreme example of that. This man, Humbert, who I think is like 38 or something, he meets this 12-year-old girl and immediately he views her as this mythical being. I think it's dangerous for men to view women as fundamentally different from them for a number of reasons. A lot of it is I don't think it's going to help your self-esteem if you're a guy. If you view a woman or this girl that you're attracted to as some kind of high-up goddess and you recognize your own humanity, you know you're not a god who can match with that, then in essence you're always going to fail to live up to this weird standard that you've created for yourself. So I think there's that, but also I think there's an element too where elevating women puts them in a position where it's almost like they can't fail, which is oddly dehumanizing. In essence, if you view someone as a paragon of virtue, then you're not letting them just be human. And at the end of the day, that's all we are, right, as humans. You try your best, and sometimes you mess up, sometimes you do good, and that's just life. But I certainly think that you see this a lot with regards to how men talk about women, specifically when dating. And again, this is not something where it's like every single guy, because it's not, obviously. And I think most people are normal. Hopefully, maybe not. I think a lot of people are normal. That's better. But I really do think that if you're entering a relationship with someone and you view them as a higher being, I think you're doing yourself and you're doing them a great disservice. And more than anything else, it's just not true. You know, men make mistakes, women make mistakes. That's just kind of how it is. The US, the entire back half of the year so far, has been consumed with the Epstein files. Long story short, Jeffrey Epstein was a pedophile. He was a weird groomer and he would set up these massages. These massages would involve like 13, 14-year-old girls who same age as Lolita. And basically Epstein was super well connected, super wealthy. He was buddy with Prince Andrew and Bill Clinton and Donald Trump. And so it's heavily believed that many of the individuals that he was associated with engaged in these massages with 13, 14-year-olds. And of course, whenever I'm saying massage, I mean, you know, sexual activity. And long story short, the government has a lot of files on Epstein, but they refuse to release them. Trump campaigned on releasing the Epstein files, but he hasn't. And there are all kinds of reports from the Wall Street Journal and the like, basically saying that Trump himself is in the Epstein files, which I believe 100%. And Republicans are trying to cover it up and defend it in the Senate. And so that crap's been in the news. And so everyone kind of knows, like I said, everyone knows that pedophilia or hebophilia is disgusting. But seeing as how this book is about the subject, I think it's worth reading if you want to really be disgusted, I guess. You want to be disgusted with the government more than you already are, and disappointed. In addition to that, there is also news about David, the singer, I think is how you say his name, D4VD. I didn't know who this guy was, but long story short, he is a 20-year-old who had a Tesla that was impounded, wherein they found the cut-up body of a 15-year-old girl. This girl was said to be in a relationship with him, and he even wrote a song that's been interpreted as about him killing her. And it's all just a very disturbing and disgusting situation, honestly. But I am inclined to believe that he did take advantage of this girl. And again, 15 is not legal, I think, anywhere. And there are reports saying that they first got together whenever she was 11. And so that makes it really freaking bad. And really, I think it's it's worth reading this book because of real life situations like that, like Epstein and like David. Because really, I think that pedophilia is one of those things that's been sensationalized in a weird way. To Catch a Predator was a very popular show, and a lot of memes have been generated about it. There are a lot of gags and jokes, but ultimately it is a very disturbing and disgusting thing. And so everyone hates child predators because it's gross. You should hate child predators. You know, I think that's fair for me to say. But in many ways, it is one of the absolute worst crimes you can commit. And so as a result, I think that people don't realize how much it's already happening. And you shouldn't need a novel telling you how horrible it is, even though this novel is freaking great. But I do think this novel is worth reading just because it reminds you of how evil it actually is. It reminds you of how evil it is to take advantage of someone and to lie and abuse them. And all in all, it's a great novel. It's not great because it's a feel-good story. It's not great because it's happy, but it is just a tremendously executed piece of literature. And I think that in and of itself is a lot of what makes this novel great. The fact that Nabokov was able to choose such a difficult subject to write about, and he was able to do justice in showing the horrors of it. Really, I do think that if anyone reads this novel and they think it's promoting pedophilia or hebephilia or whatever, I think you should reread it, because that's a lot like someone reading A Clockwork Orange and saying it promotes violence, or reading Blood Meridian and saying it promotes violence, because I don't think either of those books do. I think both of those books are brilliant as well, and they're examples of what I'm talking about, wherein they don't necessarily have likable protagonists and they actually really have unlikable protagonists. But all in all, I think this is a great novel. I think it's one of the greatest pieces of English literature I've encountered, and I guess I'm glad I got the chance to read it. So I'm really worried about YouTube demonetizing this or age restricting it or something, because ultimately I am reminded of this quote that I read. Basically, someone said that child abuse is not an adult issue, alcoholism is not an adult issue, sexual violence is not an adult issue, physical violence or mental abuse or emotional abuse, or none of these are adult issues, because unfortunately they are things that kids can encounter. And so I think it's important to keep that in mind whenever discussing these sorts of things, because ultimately there are children that are affected by these issues. And so I think that if kids have to be exposed to these things, then I think a novel is a pretty safe place. And I'm not saying that kids should read this novel, because they probably shouldn't, and they probably wouldn't understand a lot of it. There are some big words, but I think that certainly if you're a parent, it's yeah, you gotta be worried about this stuff, and especially if it's infested the freaking government. So I guess this is where we will cut the video off. And so thank you and goodbye.